minutes late. I just sent you the handouts, both to Angela and to the general address. Just checking. Did you receive the handouts?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Should I just start or should I wait until everybody has the handouts?
Maybe you can start because I have to download them and send them, so it'll take a few minutes.
Yeah, I will start, but maybe we can start with questions. Oh, first of all, good morning, everybody. And with some, do you have any questions concerning yesterday? The coherence of theism, for example, or the biblical base for apologetics, or the use of apologetics.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
If you had to pick, this is a hard question, I imagine, but if you had to pick one book to kind of suggest for starting out with, just to kind of foray into the area of apologetics, what would you suggest?
Well, there are many books. I actually have some a handout that will talk about that. One good book is definitely by Douglas Roderich, Christian Apologetics. This is the first edition. It's 740 or 750 pages, and it has about 30, 40 pages for each argument. So it's a really good summary. A shorter book would be On Guard by William Lane Craig. And that has one chapter for each argument and a good summary. So maybe let's say an easy entry would be On Guard by William Lane Craig.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, so if you got the handouts, I'm aware that yesterday we didn't finish the coherence of theism, but I would suggest that we, oops, getting a phone call. Apologies, one moment, please. I'm going to take my phone call.
It's a lot of documents, so I hope I have everything, and then we'll only send the PDF because that's
What? Which one? On Guard? Yeah. I haven't looked. I'll send you a link in a second, or I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, so what I suggest we start with the handouts for the next handout. So just for your information, what I included this morning as a handout is, the first is number 4, how to study any argument. If you're by yourself, if you want to start somewhere, this is a suggestion how to do it structurally, okay? And one example, so my suggestion is to make one document for each argument, where you include at least the structure of the argument and the arguments for each premise, and then the most important objections and how to reply to them. And 4b is an example how your summary of an argument could look like. We're going to look at that. Then 5a is how to study arguments with tutorials. So I was in Liechtenstein, and my professor was Daniel von Bachter, and he studied in Oxford. And in Oxford, you have tutorials. So you get a question on a particular aspect of philosophy of religion, and you have to write an essay on it. But before you can write an essay, you have to study 6 or 7 articles, or maybe a book, and maybe 300 pages. So you have to read around 300 pages from people with different opinions, and then you have to write an essay about it. So we're going to look at that. Then number 6 is, the handout number 6 is what universities offer apologetics courses, either as a Master of Arts in Apologetics, it could be Biola or Oklahoma, Western University, others. And it's good to get a Master of Arts in Apologetics for 2 years, and you're full-time studying apologetics for 2 years. And you could write a PhD. So more about that when we look at the handout number 6. The number 7 is how to start a reasonable faith chapter. So reasonable faith is an apologetics ministry, and they have local chapters worldwide. Basically, it is centered around the thinking of William Lane Craig, roughly kind of on the basis of William Lane Craig's apologetics. And it's helpful to be a part of this organization. There are chapters worldwide, and you could consider opening one in your own city when you're back home, or even in Vila or in Kochi, or yeah. Actually, in Ibadan, there is already a chapter from Reasonable Faith. We'll look at that. Okay, and then we can look at an overview of arguments for the existence of God, how far we get. So just so that you know which arguments there are, so you could decide if you want to study any of these. Okay, that was just an overview of the handouts. So if it's okay, we can start with number 4, how to study an argument for the God's existence. Or are there any questions? Yeah, let's just start with handout number 4. So how to study an argument? Well, the simple answer would be just read a lot of books or a lot of stuff about it. But okay, then you might read some stuff here and there, and maybe it's not structured enough. So how can you learn actually an argument? So my suggestion would be this. You have to start somewhere, either with a book or with a lecture series as a basis. You need to some kind of basis on this particular argument for God's existence. And one of them could be William Lane Craig, On Guard, Defending Your Faith with Reason and Precision. It's a short version. Or, as I mentioned, the book by Douglas Roderich, Christian Apologetics, that I showed you. So you could just read through the chapter on this particular argument and underline it and make a summary for yourself. An alternative would be to look at this lecture series by William Lane Craig. He gave a series of 35 lectures on 6 different arguments. So it's like 4 or 5 lectures of 30 minutes for each argument. So it's like 2 hours of listening. And in the end of each lecture, people can ask questions, and they have the same questions that we have. We don't understand, what does this mean? And can you repeat, or isn't this an objection or so? For example, the moral argument would be lectures 19 to 22, which is 4 lectures. And then you could just summarize what you heard, and also take the questions and as objections. And yeah, so how can you summarize it? My suggestion would be in number 2, make one document for each argument for yourself. So it should have at least 3 sections. It should have the structure of the argument. So you can open a Word document and just start with the structure of the argument. We'll get to an example in a moment. Then identify the logical form. Is it logically valid? Then you look at reasons for each premise. Why do you believe each premise to be true? And then thirdly, what are the most important objections and how to answer them? So sometimes there could be 30 objections, or you could look on internet forums and there's somebody who has a new objection, and then you can add them to a growing document. Okay, so this is my suggestion how to do this practically. So for example, take the moral argument for the existence of God. The structure could be different in each by each person, but one that is often used is this one. First premise: if there is no God, there are no objective moral values and duties. Okay, that's the first premise. Premise 2 is, but there are objective moral values and duties. Conclusion: therefore, there is a God. Okay, so this is the way that arguments are structured: premise, premise, conclusion. And if the argument is logically valid, then the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. So if you can show that both premises are true, and if this is logically valid, then the conclusion follows, therefore there is a God. So you always put into the conclusion what you want to argue for. So you want to argue for the existence of God. So the conclusion has to be, therefore, there is a God. In this case, what is the logical form? Now, this is something we have to study logic a little bit, but just for your information, this is so-called modus tollens. So the logical structure is, if A is the case, then B is the case. B is not the case, so you could shortly say not B, therefore not A, therefore A is not the case. A simple example: if it rains, the street is wet. Okay, let's say that's premise 1. Premise 2, the street is not wet. Conclusion: therefore it does not rain. That's a normal conclusion. It's logically valid. If both premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Okay, so this is something one has to look at, like introduction to logic or so. It's called modus tollens. So certain logical forms have certain names. So if A, then B, A, therefore B. That's modus ponens, for example. But you can forget the name for the moment, this modus tollens. The main point here is that this argument in particular is logically valid. That's always the first step, and we have to differentiate between logical validity and the truth of the premises. Logical validity means that if both premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. There could also be non-valid arguments. For example, if it rains, the street is wet. It doesn't rain, therefore the street is not wet. That is false, because there could be other reasons for the street to be wet. Let's say the neighbor washed his car, or let's say a hydrant has broken, and somewhere, or like in Terminator 2, this giant truck crashes and the street is wet or something. Okay, so this would not be valid. This would be a fallacy. So if I say, if it rains, the street is wet. It doesn't rain, therefore the street is not wet. That is not logically valid, because there could be other reasons why the street is wet. Okay, so it's just an example of the basic logical structure. So obviously we need some basis in logic, but this is not so difficult. It's just a bit unusual if you haven't looked into this so much. But that's how the arguments normally are structured, or it's helpful. Why do we even bother to make premise, conclusion? The helpful thing about it is that it can help you locate where is the disagreement by the other person. So if he says, I don't agree, then he has to say, which premise don't you agree with? Do you not agree with premise 1, or do you not agree with premise 2? And so the reason for using premise, conclusion is to make it more transparent. If I just say, well, look, there is morality, so there has to be God, that's a bit fuzzy. It says, no, I don't think it follows. Then how can you operationalize this and facilitate this discussion? It's by writing an actual argument with premises, and the premises should be valid. If the argument is valid, the premises lead to the conclusion. So once both people agree that the argument has a valid form, the only remaining discussion is, are the premises true? If he doesn't agree, if he doesn't want to agree with the conclusion, he has to challenge one of the two premises. Okay, so this is just an example of an argument, a moral argument in this case. And yeah, so this is a logically valid form. So once we establish that the form itself is valid, it's modus tollens, we can look at each premise. So what reasons are there for premise one? If there is no God, there would be no objective moral values. Well, you could say that if there is no God, then our morality would have come into existence through evolution. But if it would have come through evolution, then evolution is normally unguided. It doesn't always create the same result. So let's say you would draw back evolution, you would roll back evolution by 1 million years and would try it again. Then other moral values would have evolved. Therefore, the ones that we have now, if they are just a product of chance evolution, they are not objectively true. They're only subjectively, or they're relative. So if there is no God, then morality comes from evolution, and it could also have evolved differently. Therefore, it is relative. Okay, that's a reason for premise one. Now we could start to argue about this, and people, some atheist philosophers have given reasons why morality is objective. So we would have to look why the approaches by atheist philosophers are not correct, or what is missing in them, etc. And then reasons for premise two. Okay, there are objective moral values. Interestingly enough, no real philosopher disagrees to this, but on the street, almost everybody today disagrees. Everybody says, no, there are no objective moral values. But the reason that there are objective moral values is, if there would not be, then you couldn't call anything false, Either putting people in concentration camps is not worse than giving them a house and a job or something, or torturing innocent people is not objectively false. So you could look for extreme examples of immorality and ask them, are you sure that this is not objectively false? It's only subjective. Because if it's only subjective, you don't really have a rational reason to criticize a person for doing this. And if people think about it, they will probably agree, okay, there must be something objective to this value. Otherwise, I would have to admit that torturing innocent people is not objectively false because there are no objective moral values. That cannot be true, Okay, so this would be just a reason for premise two. So we are just looking at this as an example, how to study an argument and how to structure it. Okay, so you have here a reason for premise one and a reason for premise two. You can look for other reasons. Okay, and now, so as I said, you write one document for each argument. And in the first part is the structure of the argument, which we have above, premise one, premise two, conclusion. The second part is giving reasons for each premise. Why do you believe the premise is true? And the third part is, okay, what if somebody comes with an objection? What objections are there? Maybe the premises are convincing, but there's one objection that shows that the whole argument fails. One example of an objection could be the Euthyphro dilemma. It's from Plato's dialogue Euthyphron. Plato was a philosopher 390, I think he lived 427 to 360 or something before Christ. And so he was asking he was having a dialogue with a priest, and the priest said, we have to follow the commandments of the gods. They believed in many gods. And Socrates asks him, okay, how about these commandments? Does God command these things because they are good? But that means that goodness exists outside of God. I mean, is God referring to some objective standard outside of himself? Then morality is not based in God. But, or are the commandments good because God commands them? But that would open the door for arbitrariness. And maybe God would command us to torture innocent children. I mean, nobody could agree that this is good, but let's say any command would be good if God would command it to us. Then the problem is of arbitrariness. God could command anything, kill all the people you see or something. And that seems not true that this is good just because God commands it. So how do we answer this? In either case, so why are these commandments good? Does God command them because they are good in themselves? Then morality exists outside of God. So we don't need God for morality. So the premise one is false. If there is no God, there are no objective moral values and duties. If the commandments are only good because God commands them, that can also not be true because it would be arbitrary. Because what if God commands us to torture innocent people? So then also premise one wouldn't be true, because if they are based in God, it would seem arbitrary. God would just command something. He could command something that is not not good. So how could that be objective if it depends on the arbitrary will? So morality is not based in God. Therefore, premise one is false. Therefore, the argument fails. And this is not a strong argument for the existence of God. You need to look for other arguments, basically. That would be the conclusion from an atheist. Now, how to answer this? One could say that commandments are good because God decides to give them to us, but on what basis? He doesn't decide arbitrarily, but he looks to himself as the standard and paradigm of all goodness. God would not command us something that is immoral, but he looks to himself. He decides by himself as the standard. So it's not subjective, and or it's not arbitrary, and therefore morality can be based in God. If you want to read on this, there's an article by William Alston, what Euthyphron should have said. So how Euthyphron should have answered. So this is just an example. So we're not actually looking at the this objection in detail, but it's more to show you this is how an objection could look like. If it is successful, if you don't have an answer, then the argument fails, at least for the moment, until you have an answer to this objection. So if you want to defend an argument, it's good to look what would atheists say, and then simply write down all the objections and think about them, and think about if there is a good reply or not. Maybe there are 20 objections possibly. And then you have to always go back and say, okay, what do I find something in the literature or so? Yeah. And then okay, how to do this? If you have an argument, you could ask a friend or your mom or whoever, somebody in the class, and what do you think of this argument? Okay, your mama will say, oh, it's so great, but you need critical feedback, and ask it to somebody who doesn't agree with it. Ask an atheist friend maybe, and he will find something that is not good with the argument, and or go into a group of atheists or a discussion group of atheists and Christians and show the argument, and then ask them to come up with the best objections and say, okay, thank you for the objection. I will look into this. And yeah, so So this is how you come to objections, by discussing or by showing the argument. And let's say you find answers. How to find answers? You can look through the book again. Maybe you overlooked something, and when you read the book, maybe he did have an answer to this, and actually he does cover the Euthyphron dilemma, and how maybe you need to reread it again. And yeah, or you look for on the certain websites, bethinking.org or Apologetics 315, or you could look at debates. There are debates on YouTube. Is morality based in God, or can there be morality without God? And see how the atheist argues, and maybe the Christian has a good answer for it that convinces you. You should only write down what convinces you. Yeah, it's helpful to have a collection of essays. Now here's an example. This is an anthology, like a collection of essays on every topic: philosophy of religion, a reader and guide. There are many of those collections of essays, and then you can look for an essay on this particular argument and see if there's an answer on this. Yes. So if the one with an asterisk, I did find online as a PDF. So Pollmann and Ria, this is available online in some places as a PDF, or Wainwright you can find online, etc. Good. Now there's a lecture by Timothy McGrew. He gives a speech on practical apologetics. He recommends to focus on one argument, or maybe one argument for the existence of God and one argument for the truth of Christianity. I mean, it's good to have a general overview of what arguments exist. So we'll look at the general overview later. That will be handout 8. But it's good to specialize on one argument. For example, argument for the resurrection of Jesus is a very important argument. It's good to specialize in it. You specialize on one argument for the existence of God: complete moral argument, or fine-tuning argument, or the cosmological argument. Only if it appeals to you personally, as long as you find it convincing. If you have been convinced that it doesn't work, then you have to drop it and look for another one. So you shouldn't defend something that you don't believe. And it forces you to think. And sometimes the objections by atheists might be overly unnatural or sophisticated or something. And but don't become angry. It only forces you to think more deeply. So it would be good to have one argument in where you can answer almost every possible objection. Of course, you could write a PhD on it, then you have to study it for 3 years full time, and then you have read all the relevant literature at that point in time, and then you're probably covered for any objections, or its strengths and weaknesses, and then you can give a lecture at a university, and you will not have to be afraid that somebody asks a question that you cannot answer. But even if you do, I believe that we should be focused on truth and not on being right. And if there's a good objection, you can say, okay, interesting. I haven't thought about this, and maybe I need to revise. Thank you. And but I will look into it and get back to you later, or give me your email address. I will send you a reply, maybe if I find an answer. So it's good to admit if you don't know. And yeah. So that's the practical suggestion, is therefore just focus on one argument, choose one. But before you choose one, it's you can look at the overview and see which argument speaks to you strongly. Yeah. And then 7, what you can do to stay a bit updated on apologetics is listen to some apologetics podcasts, for example, Reasonable Faith podcast or some other apologetic podcasts. I think this is not, the list is a little bit shorter now from the 16. I think some of them have stopped, but yeah. There's still some of them, and there are new ones. So, and I suggest that you become member of a Christian Apologetic Alliance on Facebook, if you're on Facebook. But you have to follow certain instructions to sign on. Okay, that is my suggestion for how to set it. So basically, make an argument, write the premise, conclusion. Also, sorry, make a document for each argument that you want to study. Then start with the structure of the argument, premise, conclusion. Check if it's really logically valid. And then look for the reasons for each premise. And then look for the best objections available. And then try to write down an answer for each objection. And then later, if you argue online, you could just copy and paste your answer to each objection or so, or you could at least look at what you have already written. Okay, are there any questions? Yeah, this is just in case you want to study an argument. So yeah, this is my suggestion. But you could also just read about it a lot. But if you just read a lot of articles, this and that, then you vaguely remember what they wrote, but maybe you cannot replicate it. So my suggestion is to make your own document. Then you can more easily, once you have written it down for yourself in a certain structure, it's more easy for you to replicate. Okay, and then the next could be you go to a youth group or ask if you can present it in your church, in your Bible group, or maybe on a special evening, and then you present the argument. But before you do it in front of a bigger church, you should really study it well, because it could be uncomfortable if somebody comes with a standard objection and you don't know it. So I would really recommend to study it well, but you can do it in a small group if you don't know it yet so well, just to show it to others and ask them for objections, and then you learn from it. Any questions? No. Okay, great. Let's look at, okay, this is the procedure. Now, how could your document look like? Let's open the 4B, the handout 4B. It's just how would how could this look in the case of the moral argument? It's already in there, but this is a little bit longer. This is a handout that I used in my university or in my church, and it was based on the lectures by William Lane Craig, and I also looked into one or two books. So this is my summary that I gave. Here's the explanation. Here's on the page 1, the structure of the argument, premise 1, premise 2. Oh, there's a grammar mistake. Conclusion with C, obviously. Modus tollens, other premises convincing. Here are some more arguments for premise 1, arguments for premise 2. What are the most important objections? And some literature. Basically, this is how it could look, but you could find 15 objections to the moral argument. These are just 3. Okay. Any question? Yeah, if not, just let's move on. You can just keep it in the back of your mind. If you want to study an argument, how would you possibly do this? How could you do it in a structured way? Okay, this is if you study for yourself. Now let's look at handout 5A. This is if you would study at a university. How would that look like? So what I showed you in 4 is if you're on yourself and you just want to get an introduction to an argument. But if you want to study it at a university in England or America, this is how it could look. You can open number 5A. Here are the different topics. This is how you would study philosophy of religion with Daniel von Wachter, for example. He's a philosopher. He studied in Oxford with Richard Swinburne. Swinburne is one of the leading philosophers of religion. So let's take omniscience, the first one. Yeah, if you go to page 2, oh no, sorry. Let's go back to the top where it says, read thoroughly the guidelines for writing a philosophy essay. Follow the links to other guidelines. So basically, he says how to write an essay. So if you want to study the arguments, you write an essay for each one, and it's called a tutorial. Then you will send in the essay to the professor, and the professor will tell you which arguments are not good or where you didn't argue conclusively. And then it's going to be graded. So it starts with a question. So let's look at number 1. And he says, answer the question exactly as it is written here, or discuss with me how to change the question. The texts under essential reading are obligatory. Those under further reading are optional or advanced. Defend your answer against the other answers given in the text. And this is then something for German students. If you prefer German texts, some of them have been translated, etc. So answer the question exactly. And the texts under essential reading are obligatory. So let's look at number 1, omniscience. Essential reading would be the following essays or chapters: Nelson Pike, Divine Omniscience and Voluntary Action in Philosophical Review, volume 74, 1965. It has 15 pages. This is an essay by an atheist, Nelson Pike. His essay sparked a giant discussion on the question on whether there's a contradiction between God's foreknowledge and our future free actions. It's a very good essay by an atheist. And here are some replies. This is by Richard Swinburne, The Coherence of Theism, chapter 10. Or William Hasker, God, Time and Knowledge is an entire book. Read chapters 1 to 7 in chapter 10. Then there's a new essay by Nelson Pike, A Latter-day Look at the Foreknowledge Problem. He summarizes, after nearly 30 years, what were the answers given and why they all fail. And William Alston, Divine Foreknowledge and Alternative Conceptions of Human Freedom. And he gives one possible other answer. So this is just the essential reading. If you wanted to, you could just read this and write an essay about this. By the way, do you know how to find scientific literature on the web? There is a website called sci-hub.st, sci-hub.st. So there is it's semi-legal. It has all the all the literature from the last 50 years or so. You could go to a library, look for this particular magazine. For example, you want to look for the first essay, Nelson Pike, Divine Omniscience and Voluntary Action. So let us first Google this, Nelson Pike, Divine Omniscience and Voluntary Action in Philosophical Review. Let's take that and Google it. Then what you get is JSTOR, and you get Phil Papers. Let's go to the Phil Papers link. There's a link at Phil Papers, and there you find a DOI number. Let's copy the DOI number 10.2307/2183529 and go to the C-Hub website, and then click open, and then you find this article online, and you can download it. Did you follow? Could you?
Can you repeat?
Yeah. Sorry?
Can you repeat it?
Yeah. Okay, so basically, if we look at this this list of literature you have to read for a certain essay, there are certain articles mentioned. For example, here, Nelson Pike, Divine Omniscience and Voluntary Action, was written in Philosophical Review 1965. You could go to university and see if they have this special magazine at the year 1965, and you can go there and copy it on a copy machine. If they have it, maybe you need to order it from another university. And another option would be to check out online if you can find it. So there is this website called C-Hub, SCI-HUB.st. Did everybody find the website, C-Hub? Okay, and in order to find an article on C-Hub, you first need the DOI number. How can you find the DOI number? This is a digital identifier number. A DOI number is a number that, so each article that has ever been written gets a DOI number. It's a unique digital identifier. In this case, it's 10.2307/ etc. How do you find this DOI number? You take the name of the article and you Google it, okay? If you Google Pike, Divine Omniscience and Voluntary Action, then you get several websites. The best one is to look is at philpapers.org. The second link is philpapers.org, Divine Omniscience and Voluntary Action. Do you see it? If you have, do you have internet or? Maybe not. Anyway, and if you open this page on Phil Papers, you will see abstract, categories, keywords, and then DOI. So here's the DOI number. You can copy and paste the DOI number, and you go to the C-Hub webpage. And then you plug in that number, and then click on open, and then you get the article by Nelson Pike. I think I will just write this down and send it as a handout later, so you have an example. Yeah. And okay, that's that. So let's go back to this how to study arguments with tutorials. Try to find these online. But for the books, I mean, Richard Swinburne is a very good book. I would order it, or William Hasker is also a very good book. And then you have to order this, or maybe you find it online somewhere. And then read these essays and think about it. And then you have to go back to the question. What is the question here? For omniscience, on page 2 at the bottom, the question is, could there be an omniscient being? Could there be? Well, if omniscience itself is self-contradictory, and is an incoherent concept, then there couldn't be an omniscient being. That's what an atheist would like to say. Omniscience is incoherent, therefore there cannot be an omniscient being. And if you say that God is omniscient according to classical theism, then God doesn't exist. So in this case, maybe as a Christian, your answer would be yes, there could be an omniscient being. If so, would his existence be incompatible with his own free will? So you have to argue for the coherence of omniscience. And then and the second question is, if so, would his existence be incompatible with his own free will? For example, God knows what he will do tomorrow. Therefore, tomorrow he no longer has a free will. That's what an atheist would say, and therefore God cannot be omniscient and have a free will and be omnipotent. But one possible answer would be that God's free action in the future is metaphysically prior to his foreknowledge, so it doesn't impede on his omnipotence, because his foreknowledge is dependent on his future action, and it doesn't the causation doesn't go the other way. But of course, that's difficult, causes difficulties because of time paradox. And then how about the free will of humans? Let's say I decide to make another coffee today at 10:30. Does God already know this? And if he knows it, am I still free? Because free means I can do otherwise. If I cannot do otherwise, then I'm not really significantly free, would be the argument. Therefore, either I have free will or God is omniscient and has foreknowledge, but not both. And since I believe in free will, God doesn't have omniscience, he doesn't have foreknowledge, and foreknowledge should be a part of omniscience, therefore God is not omniscient. Of course, there are many answers to this. So you will find the answers in the book by Swinburne, Coherence of Theism, or by Hasker. Both are open theists. You could also look at Alston, he has an answer. Plantinga, if you look at further reading on page 3, Alvin Plantinga, On Ockham's Way Out. It's a essay that is available online. You can just Google it. You will find a PDF without looking at the C-Hub website. You can find it online because it has often been quoted. And he has an answer that is consistent with Reformed thinking. So yeah, so this is just to show you, if you were to study philosophy of religion, you would have to read the leading journal articles on this topic. This handout is helpful because it shows you immediately which are some of the most important essays that have been written on this topic. Nelson Pike is definitely an essential, very important essay. Swinburne's reply is important. Hasker's reply is important. Plantinga's reply is important. And then there are some additional articles. So, and then obviously it's endless. So when I studied this, I had like 2 entire folders, Ordner. How do you call Ordner?
Folders is right.
Well, folders. Yeah, so I had like maybe 1,000 pages on it. Yeah. A binders. Yeah, a binder. So, and because I made the mistake to want to answer every question or to be too thorough. And the idea is when you study philosophy of religion at place like Oxford or with Daniel von Wachter, that you go through each of these questions and get a rough idea on what are the possible answers, and you're forced, and while you write the actual essay, you're forced to think about the possible answers, and it's to get a rough idea. So once you did this, you have familiarized yourself with the general questions there are, And then this works in the back of your mind, and you can go to the next topic, but you have heard about it, and you have some basic answers to the basic objections there. And the idea is to do as many of these. And just what you could do also for yourself is read just the essential reading and then go to the next topic and then go through all the topics or something. Yeah. So you can be as thorough as you want. You could write a PhD on one of these topics. Yeah, so this is just to show you, take a look at Nelson Pike's article. If this is something you feel interesting or like, then it would be an idea to consider studying philosophy of religion. But if you say, this is way too theoretical, then it's also good to know that maybe this is not where you want to specialize also. Okay, so are there any questions on this? Okay. Now, what universities offer, by the way, handout 5B, this is instructions for how, for example, Daniel von Wachter wants you to write this essay. It could be 5 pages or 10 pages on each question. And here he gives you some instructions how to do this. Stay focused, remove any word that is not necessary. Maybe start with the clarifying the question, then say what will be your answer, state your answer, and then give the reasons for your answer. The most important is to give reasons for your answer, and then look for the objections, and then make a conclusion, etc. Okay, some practical instructions. Yeah, this is just for your information how a university would ask you to write essays, at least in the analytical style of philosophy of religion. The next would be number 6. What universities offer apologetics courses or degrees? Do you have the handout? Yeah, okay. So for example, there could be Biola University. If you have a bachelor somewhere, you could apply for a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics. It's fairly expensive, $20,000, I think, for 2 years. But it has a very good accreditation, and a lot of people who have a Master of Arts from Biola get accepted for a PhD program. So the Master of Arts in Apologetics would give you a general overview of the whole area of apologetics, and then you could specialize doing a PhD in one argument for the existence of God. Could be a fine-tuning argument or so. But this, if you want to, let's say, become a good apologist in 2 years, you can study there. Theoretically, YMAM could start a school of apologetics and in 3 months, and as a starter or something, or so, or even offer a degree, I don't know. But that's maybe not the focus at the moment. But Biola offers this, unfortunately, a little bit expensive, but it's a really good program with very good scholars like William Lane Craig, Gary Habermas, J.P. Moreland, Greg Kokel. And I think you have to be on campus for 2 weeks per year or so. The rest could be done from home. I think it can be stretched into 4 years maximum, I think. Other universities are New Orleans. Sorry, is the break at 10:15?
Yes, it's right about now.
Okay, let me just finish this and say, New Orleans, there is also a degree in apologetics, and Oklahoma Wesleyan has an apologetics degree. in Europe, you can study in Oxford, but it's very hard to be accepted. You need a straight A average, and then still might not get in. And it's also a bit more practical oriented. And eventually you can write a PhD, but yeah, you can read this. I recommend the article by William Lane Craig at the bottom, double doctorate. So he writes how his wife supported him writing a PhD thesis. Okay, but it could be a stress on a relationship. This is the other Q&A there. Somebody, yeah. Okay, this is it for the moment. Any questions?
Thank you so much for all the resources. It's incredible.
Yes, seriously. Thank you. All right. If there are no more questions, then we will go for our break for 30 minutes. So we will come back, yeah, 10:45 Swiss time. I give this time to you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on the last session so far on how to study an argument for yourself, or how it would look at university if you would to study analytical philosophy of religion, or concerning the apologetics programs? As I said, if you have the money somehow, if God provides, the Biola degree is really recommendable. You become a well-rounded apologist after the 2 years, and you can use it for the rest of your life in other ministries. Let's say you become a pastor, or will be SBS teacher or whatever, but it's good to have a background in apologetics, and it's a part of critical thinking. It also helps you with structuring a Christian worldview. Yeah, so basically this was just some suggestion. I mean, maybe start with studying for yourself by going through a book, and one of the just read one of the books. For example, the Christian Apologetics book, or On Guard. Yeah, are there any questions on that part so far?
We've been very thorough.
Sorry?
I said, no, that you've been very thorough, I think.
Okay, good. I just sent another email to Angela and the SBS group with the link on the ST Hub, how to find the article. So you can look that up. So let's look at handout 7a, how to start a reasonable faith chapter. Okay, so reasonable faith is one of several apologetic ministries. If you want to do more in apologetics, a good way is to start an apologetics group. You could teach in your church, let's say six mornings on a Sunday. Let's say you will teach 6 arguments for the existence of God. Then for each time you can make a handout of like 5 pages or 10 pages, and using the structure that I suggested, premise, conclusion, and arguments for each premise, and the main objections, and why you believe this is a good argument for God's existence. You could offer this in your church if your pastor agrees to it. But you could also go make it regionally available if you've found a reasonable faith chapter, if you want to start a reasonable faith chapter. And so reasonable faith was founded by William Lane Craig, and there are maybe 100 or 200 chapters worldwide. Basically, a reasonable faith chapter means that you could become the director, and then every month you offer a meeting to talk about an apologetic subject. So here, if you click on this link, Reasonable Faith/chapters, you see both how to apply for a chapter director and also where already chapters exist. Maybe in your city a chapter exists already. Maybe let's click on this YouTube link for a moment. Would that be possible in the SBS classroom, and share it on the screen? This small link, it's in this file 7a. It's the second link.
He's just pulling it up.
Yeah. Are you loading it up? So I could also already read, any Christian can apply to become a Reasonable Faith chapter. And it says on the website, finding a qualified local director is key to establishing a Reasonable Faith chapter. The director should be a regenerate Christian, should be evangelical in theology. It means believe in the Trinity, etc. Who manifests the fruits of the Spirit, and who has successfully worked through the Reasonable Faith 3rd edition and the study guide. So, yeah, can you open? Does the video open already? Or?
Is this the right one?
Yeah.
It's only a 2 minutes video.
Yeah, I'm playing now.
Tyson says, Kevin, I'm the chapter director for Reasonable Faith, Monterey Bay. I found Reasonable Faith's resources to be invaluable for equipping Christians intellectually, and I would love to see more chapters started around the world. Could you have Dr. Craig give a quick rundown on the simple process for starting a chapter for those who may be interested?
I would be glad to, Tyson. And he's right, it is simple. I'm surprised at how some people think this is so difficult when in fact it's easy. All you got to do is share with us your personal testimony to show that you are a genuine born-again Christian who's walking with the Lord. You then need to sign a doctrinal statement that is a general statement of evangelical biblical orthodoxy about Christian worldviews, so that we know you're not a heretic. And then the last thing is you need to complete the Reasonable Faith workbook, which is a fill-in-the-blank workbook on the book I wrote, Reasonable Faith. And by filling out the notebook or the workbook, it will show that you understand the contents of Reasonable Faith and are prepared to teach it. And so you will send your testimony, your doctrinal statement, and the completed workbook to Stephen McAndrew, who is the National Director for Chapters, and he will grade the workbook to make sure you've answered each question correctly. If there are questions that you have not answered correctly, he'll return it to you and say, this answer wasn't accurate. Look again and redo this one. And after one has completed that process, then we are going to give you a platform where you can use our name and our logo and materials to launch your own ministry. This is a way to empower you to have a ministry of your own. So I would encourage folks to take advantage of it.
Okay. So basically, you have to work through this book, Reasonable Faith, and fill in the workbook. And then you can look at the chapter directory, where are already chapters. And here are some examples. One is actually in Ibadan, Nigeria. One is in Jos, Nigeria. So there is already a chapter in your area. And then there are 3 chapters in India. I think not sure how far it is from Kochi. There's one in Germany, etc. So there are chapters all over the world. The next handout is the 7B. Did you get that? 7B. That is the actual workbook. This is how it looks. So it's 23 pages. And for each page in the book, basically, there's a question. What two approaches to the subject of apologetics does reasonable faith not address? How is reasonable faith structured, etc. And then, for example, on page 2, look at the definition of Christian apologetics. What four purposes does apologetics serve on page 15? Well, you can go to page 15 of the book and read it and just fill in. So basically, you go through the whole book and it goes through the arguments. So if you want to study apologetics, you could also say, I'm just going to study through this reasonable faith book and answer all the questions. And thereby, you will also master the arguments. So it's another way to study apologetics for yourself. And you could send it in and say, maybe I will start it later, but here's already my application. How are these answers? And then you might get a correction, and you can still decide if you want to start such a chapter. Just showing you this, so it's nothing too difficult. It's the book is, yeah, this is not overly easy, but I think it's doable. And if it's confusing, they will help you and correct your answers. So basically, once you're through this, you are basically equipped to teach apologetics. And then you could open a chapter, and then your chapter would be put on the website that that I just showed you. You know, the Reasonable Faith website chapter directory, and it means if somebody in your area, in your country, is wondering, is there anything on apologetics here? They would find it online. And if you have a question, you could just write to other people in the Reasonable Faith group, look, I don't understand this or so. And it's helpful so people know you're roughly on the same page as William Lane Craig, or you're a sincere Christian or so. Yeah. It's just one option if you are looking into applying this. Obviously, we haven't even discussed too much about the actual arguments, so maybe you don't know yet if it's interesting, but it's just you know, to keep in the back of your mind. Should it be interesting, then this is one option how to do this, and you don't really have obligations. Officially, you should meet once a month, so roughly once a month. But if you have a 3-month timeout, nobody's gonna complain or something. I mean, it's up to you how often you want to meet with this, and it could be good as a place where local churches, if they have people who have questions or skeptics, can send their skeptics. Let's say there's an intellectual who becomes a Christian. He has a lot of questions on these. Does God exist? Is the Bible reliable? They could send their doubting people to a local Reasonable Faith chapter. Why don't you go there, meet once a month, and some of your questions may be answered there, or you could discuss this. So it's and maybe from that you could also teach in some churches locally. So yeah, I believe that apologetics is very important. As you remember, the first church fathers from 120 to 200 AD were called apologists. So it's very important to the church, and I think that is one main point how Christianity conquered the Western world. It was a strong apologetics, and strong Christian worldview thinking, applying the Bible to every area of life. So, and therefore, this is one practical way how you could further the kingdom of God in this area of apologetics. Are there any questions on this, how to start a Reasonable Faith chapter? Okay, it's just one practical possibility. Okay, now let's look at basically we could now look at the overview of the arguments for the existence of God. I also sent another email in the break to Angela and the SPCW address with a summary of the argument for the resurrection and a summary of the undesigned coincidences. Would you be interested in more in the resurrection argument or more in the arguments for God's existence? Or which one should we start with?
I guess we could do arguments for, sure.
Arguments for God's existence. Yeah. Okay, let's look at the number 8. It probably doesn't matter. Let's quickly look through the number 8, and if we have time, we can also. Okay, we have to stop at 12 o'clock, right?
Yes.
So this is 25 arguments for the existence of God. And so as on page 2, so let's quickly look at the overview, the table of contents. There are 3 cosmological arguments, 3 main ones. Then there are a couple of design arguments in physics, meaning matter that doesn't live. And then there are design arguments in biology, I mean living matter. Then there's the moral argument, which we already looked at. Then the argument number 5 from mathematical structure, argument from desire. Then there's some ontological arguments, argument from consciousness, argument from religious experience, the argument from reason. Yeah. And then there is we could quickly look at the argument from evil against the existence of God. It's probably too much to cover, but just a quick one would be, let's look at 1.2, the Kalam argument on page 2 in the bottom. It's one of 3 possible formulations of the cosmological argument. William Lane Craig wrote a PhD about it. Stuart Hackett defended it, David Oderberg, Mark Nowatzki. If you Google those names and write Kalam argument, you will find more materials. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist as premise 2. And conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause. And since, according to the Big Bang theory, during the Big Bang, matter, time, and space came into existence, the cause of this universe or bang must be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, very powerful and personal, much like God. So if you look at this argument, premise 1, premise 2, conclusion, it is valid because if both premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. I mean, it's basically logic. So nobody will say that this the structure is not logically valid. So the structure is obviously logically valid. But the question is, are the premises true? Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Well, it's both a scientific principle. If we look at something, we need to research where it came from. It's a strong common sense principle. Otherwise, we don't see pianos coming from midair or, a rabbit coming out of a hat. That's usually a trick. So it never happens that things begin to exist without a cause. So it's a strong scientific principle, but the universe did begin to exist according to a lot of cosmologists or physicists, the prevailing theory is the Big Bang theory. Evidence for the Big Bang is the redshift and the background radiation. There was a certain background radiation found, and it was traced back to a certain Big Bang. And redshift comes from the light of planets or stars changes when they move away from you. And from that, we can see that the universe is expanding. And if you calculate it backwards, it must have began to exist. Obviously, this goes into complicated cosmology. There is a lengthy article in Reasonable Faith. The book has, I think, sufficiently lengthy treatment of this argument. It could be 50 pages on this. And when you work through the Reasonable Faith book, you would work through this argument as well. And there would be reasons for each premise. So yeah, this is an argument. It's fairly intuitive, and it uses the fact of the Big Bang theory to argue for a cause of the universe. So you can simply summarize and say, yeah, I mean, there must have been something before the universe. The universe cannot come out of nothing. Therefore, there must have been a cause. And since time and space was created at the beginning, therefore, that cause must be outside of time and space, and etc. So that's one argument. If you look at the 1.1, Leibniz's cosmological argument, it doesn't use the beginning of the universe. So if somebody doubts the beginning of the universe, you could use this, and everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. If the universe has an explanation of existence, that explanation is God. Because why? Because each atom of the universe doesn't necessarily exist, so there's no reason to assume that the universe necessarily exists. So the explanation of the universe must be its cause. The universe exists, therefore the explanation of the universe existence is God. So this is Leibniz's version of the cosmological argument. Now, obviously, this would require some study. And for example, in the On Guard book, there's like 20 pages on this. So on the Reasonable Faith book, probably 30 or 40 pages. It's good to study this a little bit, and cosmological arguments have always been used in the history of Christianity, and it's good to know a little bit about it, I would say. Number 2.1, design arguments in physics. Maybe just to name two. The first one is the 2.1, the global fine-tuning argument. If you have forces like gravitation or strong nuclear force, they are really extremely finely tuned so that life can exist in the universe. Take gravity, if it would be 1 times 10 to the 34 smaller, or 1 times 10 to the 34 larger, there would be no stars, no planets, and no life. Now, this is extremely strong coincidence. You know, how much is 1 times 10 to the 34? Imagine a bucket of sand. If you only have to pick 1 grain of sand from this bucket, how big is the chance that you pick the right one? It's a very, very, very small chance, because there are millions of sand grains, right, in a bucket of sand. I mean, imagine that you have to pick 1 out of a bucket. I mean, you probably never pick the right one. But okay, now imagine the sand would cover all of Wheeler or of your city and be 1 meter high. Now the chance would be even way, way, way lower. Now imagine the sand covers all of Europe and Asia, all of Europe and Asia, you know, from Portugal to India, China, and it's 1 meter high. And then pick 1 by chance. It could be in Mongolia, it could be in Tajikistan, it could be in Italy. You don't know even which country the 1 grain of sand is, but imagine it's 1 meter high, and even if you know exactly where what the area is, it would still be nearly impossible to find this 1 grain by chance. Now imagine this sand goes up, it covers all of Europe and Asia and goes up to the moon. That's 10 to the power of 34 grains of sand. You know? So all of Europe and Asia is covered by sand, these small, tiny sand, and that goes up to the moon. And now you have to pick one. You don't know which one, and this has to be the right one. Basically impossible, but that's how finely tuned gravity is. So basically, this is a powerful illustration of the chances. If you say, well, it's finely tuned 1 times 10 to the 34, nobody can, this is just a number. It doesn't mean anything. It's too high and says, oh, okay, sounds like a big number. But if you say, talk about this, the grains of sand in covering all of Europe and Asia going up to the moon, 184,000 kilometers away, it's pretty impressive. So that's how finely tuned a universe is. And this is only gravity. There are other constants like strong nuclear force, Planck's constants, and certain values. So this is just a very powerful argument to read into. So in order to explain this away, people have to say there's a multiverse with 10 to the 500 different universes like ours. But obviously there's no evidence for any multiverse, and you would need to have a universe creating mechanism that would also need to be fine-tuned. So it's just putting the problem on a higher level. But obviously this will also get you into physics discussions. So maybe if you discuss this online, there might be one person who studied physics and he starts talking about certain theories. If you haven't studied it, it's difficult to reply. But I think for most people, for 99% of the people that you meet, this could be a strong argument. So how to study it? Write down the structure of the argument, and then look for reasons for each premise. Maybe put it in a document, and then you know the argument, and you can use it for the rest of your life, either in the church or whatever, or when you have to talk to somebody who doesn't believe in God at all. So premise 1 is there is a fine-tuning of the laws of nature, and you can find many books that give you examples of which laws of nature are how finely tuned. Premise 2, the fine-tuning of the universe is either due to physical necessity, chance, or design. Premise 3, it is not due to the physical necessity, and it's not due to chance. For that, you have to give, to rule out chance, you have to give arguments against the multiverse. Therefore, it is due to design. So premise 2 is basically either or. Yeah? So if I say either it is going to snow or to rain tomorrow, and those are the 2 exclusive choices, either or and nothing else, then I know if it's not going to snow, then it must rain, because it's either snow or rain tomorrow. So if one of them is not happening, then the other one must be happening, in this understanding of the word or. So if you say it's either physical necessity or chance or design, then you just need to exclude physical necessity and chance, and then you know it must be design. Okay, so basically this argument is logically valid. So you have to show in the argument then that the premises are true. The focus would be on premise 1, show that there's fine-tuning, but basically nobody really disagrees that there's fine-tuning. They only might disagree on whether it's necessarily so. Maybe there's one overarching law of nature that causes all these constants to be like this. But then you could say that this law of nature must have exactly the same degree of fine-tuning as if they were individually there, because the law of nature must fine-tune all of these constants. So that would be a really finely tuned law of nature. So necessity can be excluded. There's also no necessity, seems to be no necessity that gravitation has to be exactly this size or that size. Yeah, and chance can be excluded if we can have good arguments against the multiverse. If there's no multiverse, and you would say the chance is 1 times 10 to the 300 or 10 to the 34 or something, that's a really low chance. So the chance would be really low that the universe is exactly like that, with these laws of nature, that we have life. And looks very much like design. So I think this is a strong argument. I could really recommend to study it, at least to a certain degree, and learn the most important objections and how to reply. And then you have a strong argument for God's existence. It's not going to go away very soon. You will find some philosophers online who have tried to give sophisticated reasons against it. Luke Barnes is a good cosmologist. He's a Christian. He wrote a 70-page article on fine-tuning, and he summarizes all of the literature. So I could recommend to read Luke Barnes, but you can start with William Lane Craig, or with, Douglas Roderich in his book. He has a lengthy chapter on it, 30, 40 pages. Yeah, I think it's a nice argument, and this was discovered in the 20th century, the fine-tuning. And it would be kind of sad if we don't know this, or and some people say that the more science advances, the less we need God. But in this case, in the 20th century, since we had the telescopes, and since we had better observation, we could make better theories about the universe, and we see that how finely tuned everything is. This is something that modern science found out. So modern science could speak for the existence of God. Are there any questions on the fine-tuning argument? It's probably a little bit much, because this shouldn't be covered in 10 minutes. Basically, what I'm doing is just giving an overview. So if you feel that it's kind of a little bit too quick, don't worry, it's normal. But it's only to show you what is there, and create a certain interest, so you can read more later if you want to. The second would be, yeah.
Yes. Hello, Roderich. Yes, I'm very interested just in the whole kind of arguments around when something is coincidence or chance or luck, compared to when it's God looking out for you. Are there main ways that maybe you could answer an atheist there?
Sorry.
Oh.
The last question, I didn't understand the last sentence. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll speak louder. Sorry, the speaker's like there. Oh, thank you so much. Yes, so I was just asking what would be some of your replies maybe to the arguments by atheists around coincidence, chance, luck, compared to God actually looking out for you, providing for you. What would be some good arguments for showing that it's God?
I would say we are here, and we wouldn't be here if it would be coincidence, most likely, because it would be a chance. If there's only one universe, and the chance is 1 times 10 to the 34, that there is this fine-tuning so that life can exist. But we are here, so it's unlikely that this happened out of chance. It's it seems to be design. It's like when somebody wins the lottery 10 times in a row, you'd say, okay, one time, obviously that's normal, it might happen. But if somebody points to that person and says, I think that person will win the lottery, it's unlikely that person will win. And similar, life is that particular thing. Life has to come into existence. So it has to be a very particular happening. It has to be a very particular size of the fine-tuning, and then winning, that person will win the lottery 10 times in a row. I mean, one time could be accident, but not 10 times. So this is like winning 10 times the lottery. I mean, nobody would say this is by accident. Some people would say he has cheated. There is design. So it's highly unlikely, you know. It's just simply very irrational to believe that this is chance. And there's some more complicated stuff. But it's answered by Craig in his book Reasonable Faith. Some atheists say that we observe it. That's why we wonder about it. If we were not there, we wouldn't worry about it because we wouldn't exist. So we only can wonder about it because we exist, because this happens to be the way the universe is. But that is not really an answer. You know, that is not an answer, because why are we here in the first place? That's what it's highly unlikely that humans exist if God doesn't exist. So yeah, it can be tricky. I think there's a list of the objections that are usually given, but there are good answers to all of them. And I hope that if you have a more specific question, you could send it to me. I just, generally speaking, logic would say that it's highly unlikely that this is coincidence. That's the main point. If you can show that it's highly unlikely, that's enough. You don't have to prove 100%, but you know, the chance 1 times 10 to the 34, I mean, that the God exists, I mean, that's a great chance. And if the atheist wants to go to this to the last straw and say maybe it was coincidence, okay, then he simply doesn't want to believe. And I think the task of apologetics is not to force people to believe, because God has left us free will, and I think God on purpose leaves some wiggle room so that ultimately, if people do come to God, it's voluntarily out of a love of the good or love of God.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question? Is that okay?
Yeah, or you can ask many as you want.
Again, just kind of sort of flipping it, instead of it being chance that we exist, how would you answer, you know, there would be very, very little chance. It would be down, like, I'm just wondering, are there statistics about God existing being a subject of chance rather than a certainty in the scientist or the atheist's mind, that actually so I guess what I'm asking is there a higher possibility that we would come out of nothing, or is there a higher possibility that God would exist in the atheist's mind? Like, is there any research there?
Well, probably there cannot be research about probability that God exists. I mean, you mean where did God come from, or isn't it weird that such a being exists? Yeah, it should make us wonder, why does God exist? It's a good question, but maybe it has no answer. All we can say is he must exist, but it's not possible to make. Probably, I don't exactly know if I understand your question correctly. You can write it down and I can reply by email. But so you want me to you want to compare the chance that God exists to the chance that we exist, or that?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So you mean the atheist could say that God is also extremely unlikely? He's more unlikely than this fine-tuning.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would even say God necessarily exists, because, for example, if you go to the first argument, Leibniz's cosmological argument, there must be something that necessarily exists. There cannot be only contingent things that could also not exist. There must be something that always existed. That's maybe a way to look at it. So the first cosmological argument by Leibniz might have some help if everything would only exist contingently, meaning it could also not exist. That would mean that why should it come into existence in the first place? There must be something that has brought everything else into existence, or so that way is to look at it as it could be weird, but it is totally necessary. And yeah, maybe the ontological argument will also help. We can look at that a little bit later. But it's God is also, you could say God is simple, and God only has spirit. He is simple to describe. He is all powerful. It's not just powerful that he can do 73,000 things, but he can do everything. It's very simple to describe. He's also simple. He's Holy Spirit. Humans are more complicated. Humans have body and soul and are connected, and they have weaknesses, and they change all the time. God doesn't change. So God is actually a good explanation because he's more simple. According to the Occam's razor, he's more simple than the universe, more simple than humans. God doesn't have parts, as they say. The universe has 10 to the power of 78 baryons. You know, baryon is like an atom or a proton or a neutron. That's quite a lot of parts, 10 to the power of 78. And God only is one, so it's a more simple explanation. And yeah, you could, you're left with two chances, two possibilities. Either God exists as a cause of everything, as the one who necessarily exists, or the universe is there, but it would be hard to think that the universe necessarily exists. And why would it exist? It cannot come into existence out of nothing. Yeah. And for God, you can say either he necessarily exists and always existed, or he cannot exist, because God cannot come into existence out of, it cannot be that God, at one time there was no God, there was just a lot of sand and some planets, and then somehow the sand combined, and then a God came into existence. That would be really weird to assume, and because God is spirit, and so he cannot have come into existence. Either he always existed, or he was created. But if he was created, there was another being that was before him, then that being is God. So you would still have a God. So either God always existed or he doesn't exist. So those are basically the two options. And it would be really weird to assume that the universe just came out of nothing. So, I hope this partially answers without being too confusing. Yeah, but it's an interesting thought. So that's about the fine-tuning. Let's look at 2.2, the global fine-tuning of chemical elements. So global fine-tuning means it's applicable to the entire universe. Take the book, The Wonder of Water by Michael Denton, and he lists about 50 to 100 different aspects how water is fine-tuned. You know, water alone is the most important element. It's H2O and 2 water molecules and 1 oxygen molecule, atom together are water. And it has maybe, there are lots of articles, anomalies of water. If you Google that, you will find somebody has an article 20 anomalies, some has 70 anomalies. Take, for example, the density anomaly of water. Water has a density maximum at 4 degrees Celsius. Therefore, the bottom of the lakes are usually 4 degrees Celsius in bigger lakes or in winter. So the fishes can survive there. So the ice starts to form at the top of the lake. If it would be different and density would be maximum at the bottom, like any other fluid, then the bottom would freeze and the plants and the animals would die. So this is a very weird anomaly of water. And it is really helpful for life, at least in the water. So normally there are 4 or 3 states of matter, Aggregatzustände in German, solid, liquid, and gas. And maybe there's also plasma, it's the 4th state of matter. So normally the elements in solid state are most heavy. Water, however, is different. Ice is less heavy than water of 4 degrees. So water is still fluid at 4 degrees, but it is more heavy than ice. This is not the case in any other fluid. So it's really an anomaly. It is weird. And it is an anomaly that fits exactly for life. And this is just one anomaly. Another anomaly is that water has a large heat capacity and a high thermal conductivity. It is fluid enough to mix and to have streams like the Gulf Stream. It will develop streams in the ocean to transport heat from the equator to the north and vice versa. It's a temperature regulation of the Earth. When you make a planet, you could choose either like a cube, but a cube doesn't really work because it would have edges coming out and it would normally they would kind of be worn off by the weather, etc. Normally it would go into a cube form. So if you have a cube and you have one energy source like the sun, it will be fairly hot at the equator, but it will be fairly cold at the North Pole and South Pole because the sun only tangentially hits those places. And that could cause strong temperature differences. And normally that would create a lot of wind and make life more difficult. Therefore, the water is a good way to make life possible because it transports some of the heat from the equator to the northern regions. Yeah. And that's only possible because water is fluid enough, but it's also, it has, it keeps the heat, it has a heat capacity. Doesn't easily change its temperature. If you take steel, you put a steel spoon into a hot tea, the steel will fairly soon become hot. It has a quick adaptation to the temperature, but the water doesn't quickly change its temperature. You need to put a lot of energy in. So therefore, it has the capacity to save the heat and transport it to the north. May sound a little bit specific, but yeah. There's also, water is also helpful to regulate the heat in the human body. It wouldn't be helpful to regulate the heat in the human body if it would quickly adapt to the surrounding temperature, because then as soon as it gets to a less hot place, it would adapt. It has a high latent heat. Number 3, if it becomes hot outside, humans sweat, water evaporates, which takes energy, so the body gives off heat, and therefore it cools down. So if we sweat, if we run and we sweat, then the water evaporates, and at that moment it draws out the heat energy from the water, and therefore it creates coolness in the water on your body. It's a very good heat regulation system because of its high latent heat. The heat is, so to speak, stored in the fluidity. As soon as it evaporates and goes to a different state of matter, the heat will evaporate, and it will withdraw energy. Very interesting system, and exactly finely tuned for life so that our bodies can have a constant temperature. If you're running, we're getting hot, we can sweat. So this is just, also, water is an excellent solvent. It's a universal solvent. It washes minerals out of stones and brings them to fields, which is good for plants. So, if it weren't, then we wouldn't have minerals for the plants, etc. So, yeah. So these are just 4 of the anomalies, and you can read this book. It's really, really amazing. I think this is a very strong argument for the existence of God, but it takes some studies. You have to read it and work through. Basically, the arguments is like, the game Risk, where you slowly conquer more territory. So apologetics is like that. It's not like you switch something and then you know all the arguments. No, it's a year-long process, and maybe it's good to focus on one argument per year or so. Work through this book, make a summary, and then you have a really good argument for the existence of God because of the properties of water.
Excuse me, Roderich. Who is the author of The Wonder of Water?
Michael Denton, Denton.
Thank you.
Welcome. It's in the top contemporary defenders, Michael Denton and others. There's his name. Michael Denton, The Wonder of Water. Okay, this is for water, and he has also a book. He has a series. He has the same for fire. Fire is, he has a whole series. Fire is also extremely fine-tuned, so that there are some special things that are necessary for trees, etc., to grow. And so fire is a particular chemical reaction, also seems to be fine-tuned. Then light seems to be, it's from the same author, Michael Denton. Light has particular properties that are helping life, etc. So, and he wrote this book, Nature's Destiny, where he looks at the other elements like carbon. Carbon is finely tuned. Certain gases are finely tuned. So there seems to be a lot of fine tuning in our chemistry. The next would be the local fine tuning. So this is the whole universe. I mean, if water has these attributes, it will have the same attributes everywhere in the universe. You could also look at local fine tuning. There are books like The Privileged Planet by Guillermo Gonzalez that talks about why our planet is special. He's a Christian. Also, Hugh Ross wrote The Improbable Planet. Also, why our planet has particular properties that are really special, the right location in the universe. We have a molten core of iron to have a magnetic field. We have a certain outer atmosphere that filters dangerous light. We have a certain plasma shield that filters dangerous electrons. We have a large enough crust of the so that minerals can be recycled, and many other aspects. So there's a lot of aspects in the Earth that is totally special. And there's also a book by 2 atheists, Ward and Brownlee, and they wrote Rare Earth. It's in 2.5, Rare Earth by Ward and Brownlee, written in 2000. 2 atheists that say, maybe life is not that often in the universe, or not at all. It's so many coincidences that are needed for our special planet. So I think it's a good argument if you read Ward Brownlee, also Hugh Ross and Guillermo Gonzalez. It's really interesting. And yeah, so this is physical design, so design in physics. You can also look at design in biology, but biology is highly contested because evolutionary theory, I think Richard Dawkins said that Darwin made it possible for an atheist to be intellectually fulfilled. It used to be impossible to believe there is no designer, because where do all these plants come, and the fruits and everything seems to be exactly designed for humans. But with evolutionary theory, there came an explanation that allowed you to think, well, it just evolved and only the most fit organisms evolved just by chance. So eventually it had to produce something like this, and we evolved just by chance. But here are some arguments that evolutionary theory cannot explain. The first would be the argument from abiogenesis. So bio is life, genesis, how it comes into existence, and abiogenesis, how does life come from non-life? Yeah, how could non-living matter evolve into life? So a simple argument would be that life happens in a cell. The cell is the most simple unit where life happens. Now, if life came from nothing, then there should have been a cell that came out of nothing and already was fully formed, So that's highly unlikely, but the even more unlikely is that how does life multiply? If you have cells that are divided into two, and then you have two cells, and those two cells multiply in four cells, etc. So life can only exist if there is a cell in which life happens. So a cell has a membrane, it has some energy generation. But it must also have a copy machine for itself. So it can only exist if if life came from nothing, then there must have been a cell that came from nothing plus a copy machine that copies the DNA that has the information of the cell. So we can look at this animation on page 6, the movie Unlocking the Mystery of Life. Could you maybe put that on a screen, and we can look from minute 46, 40 seconds until minute 50. So we can already, while you prepare this, we can read the text below. And so we're not too surprised when the text comes. So this will be an animation of what happens when a cell is copied. So you have to think, what is more likely, that an intelligent designer, the God, basically the second link on page 6, not the first link. What is more likely, that an intelligent designer, for example, the God of the Bible, designed this, or that all of this spontaneously derived from non-matter? And both, the first cell both had a DNA and the copying mechanism of the DNA. So this is here, the text here that I wrote on page 6 is basically a transcription of what is said in the movie from minute 46 to minute 50. And yeah, it's about how DNA. Yes? Okay, so, we don't need to read it now. You can just play the movie. Don't listen to the text. You can listen, don't focus too much on understanding it. Just look at how complex this seems to be. Yeah, exactly.
Matched the multiple discoveries in molecular biology.
In the years since Kenyon's rejection of chemical evolution, science has revealed the details of an entire system of information processing that bears the hallmarks of intelligent design. With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system at work. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism. In a process known as transcription, a molecular machine first unwinds a section of the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions needed to assemble a specific protein molecule. Another machine then copies these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA. When transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nuclear pore complex, the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is directed to a two-part molecular factory called a ribosome. After attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell and then linked into chains often hundreds of units long. Their sequential arrangement determines the type of protein manufactured. When the chain is finished, it is moved from the ribosome to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape critical to its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is then released and shepherded by another molecular machine to the exact location where it is needed.
This is absolutely mind-boggling to perceive at this scale of size such a finely tuned apparatus, a device that bears the marks of intelligent design and manufacture. And we have the details of an immensely complex molecular realm of genetic information processing. And it's exactly this new realm of molecular genetics where we see the most compelling evidence of design on the Earth.
Okay. Yeah. So what did you think when you saw this? Basically, what people who say that life came from nothing, they have to say that there was a cell coming from nothing that already had the DNA and it had a copying machine of the DNA. And a copying machine of the DNA is extremely complicated. You saw the pictures there. So this is, I think, a strong argument. It's fairly intuitively strong. Of course, there are atheist researchers who try to find possibilities how it could be explained that life comes from non-life. If you want to go deeper, a good place would be this series of 13 videos and I think in total 9 or 10 hours long, by James Tour, and he had about 700 research publications. He was one of the most quoted scientists. You remember that when there was the Reformation, Martin Luther had to debate against the strongest opponents, right? Johannes Eck or Cajetan or some brilliant Catholic opponents. So when you have somebody making a thesis like this, there will be aggressive opponents. One of them is Dave Farina. He's a YouTuber. I think he has a Bachelor of Science only, but he comes across as very self-confident, and he basically insults James Tour and says, "How can you be so stupid?" If you read it, if you listen to his videos by Dave Farina, you will think, okay, he must be right because he's very confident. But if you read Aristotle's book Rhetorics, Aristotle said a part of rhetorics is to pretend to seem very confident so that those who have no clue think you really know what you're talking about. You can read Aristotle's book Rhetoric. It's a classic, written in 350 before Christ, still a standard work. But this is what this, you can listen to this aggressive YouTuber, and afterwards you will say, I don't really like this argument. Maybe somebody will make a video of me or something. But this is how strongly contested this argument is. Actually, the only way to really find out the truth would be to study it for yourself, you know. And one way to study it would be get a standard book on cellular biology, for example, Zellbiologie. It's a standard book. It has 500 pages. It tells you everything about the cell. And if life is in cells, and the first life must have come into existence in a cell, then this studying the cell would be an important aspect for this argument. Also, this is by Michael Denton, The Miracle of the Cell, the same author that we just had. And he writes about the incredible stuff going on in a cell. And it can give you a strong conviction that it's really impossible. But it's always good to read secular books on this as well. What is the current scientific status? So if you want to study this argument, then you should read the current standard books in secular biology. I mean, if you really want to become a specialist in this argument, you probably should study biology, maybe get a PhD, and yeah. What did you think about the video? Or maybe you knew it already, or
It's really cool.
Yeah, this is just one. I'm just showing you some arguments that you could look into. I mean, you could either say, I just want to have a basic grasp, and if you have a basic grasp of the argument, you can use it with 99% of the people. I think it's intuitively appealing. So a short version would be, life has to be in a cell, and the first cell has to have a DNA and a copy machine of the DNA. And this video shows how complicated this copying goes. And it's really, I think, nearly impossible to imagine this comes from chance. The next one would be irreducible complexity. That's 3.2. Take a look at this bacterial flagellum. It's hotly debated also. Howard Berg says this is the most efficient machine of the universe. Like the Escherichia coli bacterium has a small flagellum on the outside. It's like a cilium or something. It helps it to move in the water. So in order to turn this small cilium, there has to be kind of like an outboard motor. You know, if you want to turn something 100,000 times per minute, there has to be a motor. And there is kind of an outboard motor. It needs 40 proteins to work. And the argument is that it cannot have come by accident. And 40 proteins must be in place at the same time. There must be a cilium in place. And if that would slowly evolve over 100, 200 years of generations, and you would only have 39 proteins, and you would have no cilium, or the cilium is too short, then it would be of no use. And the animals or beings that have useless organs normally die out, according to evolutionary theory. It's a good. It's also in the same movie. If you watch the movie from minute 10 to minute 20, in the same movie that we just looked at, there is some more to this. So there is a lot of discussion on this. There's a Wikipedia article that says, no, this has already been explained, how this could come into existence without design. But I asked a biologist, Günter Bechli. He was the former director of a biology museum, evolutionary museum. Then he became a Christian. And he says, no, this still is a good argument, but you would have to study it a bit. You can start with Michael Behe, Darwin's Black Box. But this is a highly contested topic. If you don't like controversy, you can focus on the design in physics, like water or fine-tuning. We already had, the next one is the human body. 11 systems must go online simultaneously. The short version would be 2 systems, the lung and the heart. You know, the lung pulls oxygen from the air and puts it into certain blood vessels, and then the heart pumps the blood to every cell. So every cell needs oxygen. And then once the oxygen is used, it is transformed into carbon dioxide, and then the blood also transports the carbon dioxide back to the lung, and the lung breathes out, and the carbon dioxide leaves the body. Okay, that's how a lung and our heart. It's a miracle. But in order to work, both have to be fully functional. You cannot have a heart that is not yet ready, then the lung is no use. What use to have a totally good lung, but no heart that distributes the oxygen to the cells? Or what use is a heart that works if the lung doesn't really work, and the transformation from the air and pulling out the oxygen, putting it into the blood doesn't work? Then you can pump as much as you want. There's no oxygen. So both have to be fully in place. I think it's a good argument. I have often used it, and intuitively clear, easy to understand, easy to present. What good is a heart without a lung? What good is a lung without a heart? They must have been totally in existence at the same time. And you could expand this and say, that's 2 systems, but the body has 11 systems. If you go to the next page, all these systems have to work together. They cannot have gradually come into existence. And on page 9, you see those 11 different systems: cardiovascular, digestive system, endocrine system, integumentary system, that's the skin. Endocrine is the hormones. Lymphatic system, it filtered out lymph fluid and makes a certain fluid balance in the body. Muscular system, nervous system, reproductive system, respiratory system, skeletal system, urinary. That's 11 systems. Other publications have 12 systems. Anybody who reads even a secular book on how the human body is constructed, I was thinking about reading a PhD in the design argument. They have here also their 12 systems, and it's amazing how all of they work together. You know, it's really, you can marvel. If you want to praise God over something, read something about the human body. I think this is a strong argument. It's intuitively clear, and yeah, you can easily learn it and share it, and then keep it in your stock of arguments. If somebody asks, why does God exist? Here's a good answer. The body has 11 systems. They all have to be in place and go online at the same time. Okay. The rest you can read yourself. If you have questions, then always feel free to send me an email. And yeah, these are just examples. Okay, 12 o'clock. Any questions?
Okay, wow. Thank you so much. I think we all really enjoyed your teaching. And I want to give some time for feedback, and I figured we just go from location to location. So I want to give India first some time if you want to give some feedback to Roderick, what you learned, what you liked, or if you still have a question, then this is your time to share.
India, can you hear us?
Does somebody like to share from India?
Yes, yes. Oh. Thank you sir, for coming and joining in online to teach us. And we are so blessed through your class. The way how you shared class is very. These 2 days is very blessed days for me. So I blessed a lot. Thank you for coming and teaching us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anybody else from India? Yes.
Yeah, I like the way that he said everything is designed. So the gravity and earth and also the cell, everything is designed uniquely. So I like that. So it was very interesting teaching from you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, if you have any questions later, you can always, send an email. Yeah. Okay.
Is somebody else from India? Then maybe somebody from Nigeria wants to give feedback.
Thank you so much for the teaching and the material so precious and great hard work you have done and thanks for sharing with us. It's going to be a great resource for us in the future. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any ways to improve, that would also be helpful. You can also send me an email if you, what could I do better?
Yes, maybe somebody from Nigeria. Okay.
Let's go for it.
Yes. Then we go to our class here. Maybe you guys have some feedback that you want to give.
Yeah, I appreciate so much the resources. I think above